Good afternoon. Welcome to our 62nd Distinguished Faculty Lecture. In 1981, the university inaugurated the annual Hofstra University Distinguished Faculty Lecture Series. And since the fall of 2000, we've had 2 lectures a year, one in the fall and one in the spring focused on scholarship and pedagogical innovations. This year's lecture is titled Language as a Political Tool, Spain and the US Compared. And we're honored to have our speaker, Professor Vicente Lledó-Guillem, I probably said that all wrong, who's a professor of Spanish in the Department of Romance, Languages, and Literatures. The lecture today focuses on the ideological and political tensions that arose after the municipal elections that took place in the Valencian Region of Spain on May 28, 2023. While in the Valencian region there are 2 official languages, Spanish and Catalan, the lecture argues that the outcome of these elections, with a coalition government between the Spanish Conservative Party, PP, and the far-right group, Vox, entails the support of Spanish monolingualism. Professor Lledó-Guillem claims that 3 ideological and political arguments supporting Spanish and as the only legitimate language in Spain have also been used to promote English as the only acceptable language in the United States. The comparison is pertinent as the US is, after Mexico, the 2nd country in the world regarding the number of Spanish speakers. Professor Lledó-Guillem is a professor of Spanish. His main areas of research are the history of Spanish and Catalan languages and literatures from a political, ideological, and cultural point of view. He pays particular attention to how literature and language relate to identity, nation, and power in the past and in the present, especially in the Middle Ages and the early modern period. Between November 2020 and January 2021, he was awarded the Maria Villan Gomez Visiting Professorship for Catalan Studies at Leipzig University in Germany. In addition to publishing more than 30 journal articles and book chapters in prestigious academic journals and academic presses, Dr. Lledó-Guillem is the author of 4 book monographs in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Catalan. His recent book monograph, recently published in Catalan, constitutes the basis of today's lecture. So with that, I would like to invite you to come up to the stage and to do your presentation.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you all for having taken the time to attend the lecture. So I'm going to start with a map Spain. Spain is one of the states in the Iberian Peninsula, together with Portugal, Andorra, Spain, and the United Kingdom here in Gibraltar. And so the Spanish state is in the southwestern part of Europe, and it's one of the 27 members of the European Union. It became a member in 1986, and it's also a member of NATO, and it has a population of about 49 million people at the moment. And it's a constitutional monarchy, and the king is Philip VI, and is a constitutional democracy as well, at least since 1978, when the Spanish Constitution was approved. Now, from our point of view today, Spain is important because in this area here, this is the birthplace of the second language with the largest amount of native speakers in the world, Spanish, was born around this area. Now, Spain is divided in 17 regions, 17 autonomous regions that follow the Spanish Constitution approved in 1978, but they have their mini constitutions, which are called statutes. Okay, so just look at them. And we have here don't know why it's changing, but you have there Catalonia, you have the region of Valencia, apologies, and then the Balearic Islands. These 3 regions we will pay special attention to. Now, important questions for this talk. So, are there any other languages in the Spanish state apart from Spanish? The answer is yes. So are they real languages or just varieties or dialects of Spanish? How do we decide what a language is? This is a very deep, problematic question, but we are going to use 3 criteria to determine that. So a sort of linguistic information, linguistic message would be considered, or a sort of language would be considered a proper language and not a variety when it has its proper differentiated grammar, dictionary, and spelling rules, also called orthography. Also, if it has a historical tradition, so you have a history of English literature, for example, a history of Spanish culture, so that helps. And then you have a population who considers it a symbol of identity. Now, according to that, you can see in this map the different languages. So you can see there in the map in green places where in theory Spanish or Castilian is the native or original language, and then other colors that constitute different languages. Leaving aside Portuguese there, which is there you go. So leaving aside Portuguese, which is not part of the Spanish state, so you have Spanish in green, and according to the Constitution, Spanish is the official language of all the Spanish states. So every Spaniard needs to, or must know the language and has the right to use it. The other languages will be co-official with Spanish depending on the mini constitutions or the statutes of the regions where those languages are spoken. To such an extent that you have there, I was going to use the cursor, but because it changes, I'll just follow just my voice with the color. So in blue, you have Galician and light blue, and Galician is co-official with Spanish in the region of Galicia simply because the statute of that region says so. Then you have Basque in the center in red, and is co-official with Spanish in the Basque country and in the northern part of Nafarroa. And then you have, because the statutes of those regions say so. And then you have Catalan in dark orange, which is co-official with Spanish in 3 different regions, which are Catalonia here, the region of Valencia, and then the Balearic Islands. Again, apologies. And so, because the 3 regions say so. Now, you will notice that there are other colors like Astur-Leonese and Aragonese. So Astur-Leonese and Aragonese are different languages according to the 3 criteria, but the problem is that they are not recognized as separate language according to the statutes.
Oh,
I see.
Hit Windows P, duplicate.
Okay. So okay. Thank you. So you can see the map now. So again, so Galician in light blue. So all these languages, except for the Astur-Leonese and the Aragonese, these languages are not co-official with Spanish because that depends on the statutes. Okay, regional statutes. Now. Let's go to one of the languages, which is Catalan, one of the regional languages. Well, while you try to...
I will try to, yeah.
I'll keep talking, okay? So let's see. So Catalan language appears or is the native language in 3 different autonomous regions. So the region of Catalonia, which is bordering France, And then in the south, you have the Valencian region, and then the Balearic Islands. So in the Valencian region, you will notice that this would be in the east of the Iberian Peninsula. You will notice that in the statute, it recognizes the co-officiality of Spanish and Catalan, but the name receives the name of the language is Valencian, okay? And so that has created some tensions. Now, the important thing is that at this moment in the region of Catalonia, the amount of speakers is 6 million, around 6 million native speakers. In the region of Valencia, you have 2,900,000. And then in the Balearic Islands, you have around 780,000 speakers. So it's quite a considerable name. Now, it's also spoken in 3 other independent countries. One of them is Andorra in the Pyrenees with 61,000 speakers. And in Andorra is the only official language, which makes Catalan like a UN language. And then it's also spoken in the southeastern part of France, with around 142,000 speakers, but it's not official. Okay. So let's see. There you go. So I was speaking about these regions in the map. So this is the region where Catalan is the native language. So you will see how. No, that doesn't happen. Okay, it's just that I want to avoid touching the map in case it's. So anyway, so you see there Catalunya, which again the number of speakers that I gave, and if you look towards the left, you'll see La Franja, which means this part that corresponds to the region of Aragon. There are Catalan native speakers, 42,000, but it's not official in that area. And also in the lower part, you will see right here, that there are around 620 speakers, very little, but it belongs to a region called Murcia. And wonderful. Let's see. Does it work? Yeah, it's on. Okay, perfect. So, so you can see there that then in the Balearic Islands, as I said, there are 780,000 speakers. Now, these are the 3 regions, Catalonia, Valencia, and the Balearic Islands, where Catalan is official. Then other Spanish territories where Catalan is spoken but is not official would be El Carche in Murcia and La Franja in Aragon. According to their statutes, Catalan is not co-official in those areas. And then we move to other countries. Andorra further up, so you see that it's an independent country with 61,000 speakers, and the only official language of the area. Catalunya del Nord, southeastern France, in the department of the Eastern Pyrenees, you have 142,000 speakers, but it's not official in the République Française. It's not official, okay? And then you go to Sardinia, part of Italy, in the city of l'Alguer with 24,000 speakers. Catalan is spoken since 1356, but it's not official either. Okay. Let's see. Now, a little bit of the history of the language. You need to take into account that Catalan is a Romance language, which means that is a language that comes from Latin. It's the 6th Romance language according to the number of speakers. The first one is Spanish, second Portuguese, third French, native speakers, Italian 60, Romanian 25, and then Catalan with 9 is a considerable number. But if you add the ones that have a knowledge of it, we are talking about 11, 13 million speakers. Can you hear me well? Perfect. I just want to make sure. Okay, perfect. Now, during the Middle Ages, Catalan was a sort of international language. It's the first international Iberian language. What does that mean? Nowadays, the most international Iberian languages, meaning languages that are spoken in the Iberian Peninsula, which are international or sort of global, they are nowadays Spanish and Portuguese since the end of the 15th century. But in the Middle Ages, between the 13th and the end of the 15th century, middle of the 15th century, the first international Iberian language was Catalan because of the power of the medieval crown of Aragon that you see there in orange, with the expansion of the Mediterranean. So it's an important aspect to take into account. Then you have a very important literature starting in the Middle Ages. This is Ramon Llull, a missionary that used Catalan for theology and philosophy before other languages such as French or Spanish. Then you have the Catalan Chronicles, meaning that Catalan was the language of the Catalan monarchy. It was one of the languages, but the main one, the one used for the chronicles. And then in the 15th century, you have the golden age of Catalan literature with authors such as Ausiàs March, chivalry novels such as Tirant lo Blanc. And then you have here Isabella of Castile, Princess of the Crown of Castile, right there. And then you have Ferdinand of Aragon, this one, who was the prince of the crown of Aragon. So in 1469, they married in secret. They married in secret in Castile, a little bit right there, in Castile in secret. But 10 years later, Isabel of Castile becomes Queen of Castile, and Ferdinand of Aragon becomes King of the Crown of Aragon, meaning that the Crown of Castile and the Crown of Aragon join to form what it has been called Spain as a modern state. Linguistic consequences. Catalan stops being a courtly language, the language of the king and queen of the Crown of Aragon, and the language of the Spanish crown now will be Castile because the headquarters of the crown goes to Castile. I analyzed all this in my first monograph published in 2008, where I talk about this. However, even though Catalan was not a courtly language anymore, it was still an administrative and judicial language in the Catalan-speaking lands during the 16th and 17th century, until you have a king from a French dynasty, the Bourbon, occupying the crown of Spain, Philip V, who decided to create, for many reasons, political, European balance, etc. He decided to create a very centralist monarchy in Spain, which meant that the Crown of Aragon disappeared and was eliminated as an autonomous region inside the Spanish crown. And also what happened was that Catalan stops being an administrative and judicial language. So there's a sort of limbo until the middle of the 19th century with Romanticism and with the Catalan bourgeoisie becoming one of the most industrialized areas in Spain and in Europe, which led to the association between Catalan and the Catalan bourgeoisie. And there you have, for example, between 1849 and 1932, more or less, that Catalan gains a little bit of political power, plus you have the foundation of the Catalan Language Academy, which means around 1911, the philological section of the Institute of Catalan Studies. So what happens there is that you have the codification of the language, dictionary, grammar, and spelling rules. However, between 1936 and 1939, you have the Spanish Civil War, which ends up with the fascist regime, far-right regime of Francisco Franco between 1939 and 1975, which meant that minority languages were not allowed in education, administration, and media, and there was an attempt to eradicate them. However, with the democratic transition between 1975 until more or less 1980, languages, minority languages, start being cultivated once again. So now we come to the issue of language ideology that, evolves around all these topics, and this is based on my fourth monograph that I published in December. Now, what do I mean by language ideologies? If you want to have a scholarly discussion for ages, just use that term, ideology. Nobody agrees on it. So on the definition. So, and if you add language, it's not going to help. But I prefer to use language ideologies, and I'm going to give my own definition. So language ideologies will be a set or group of ideas about language in general or languages in particular that are the result of a particular historical, political, social, geographical context, but that are presented as if they were universally valid for every single period of time and every single geographical space. Language ideologies are not only about languages. They are always about something else. So they refer to other concepts like nation, identity, social class, and they are neither true nor false. In fact, they are partial visions because they are the result of a context. That's why they need to be reinforced all the time, but they can also be contested. So language ideologies are always political. And politics, we need to think about it in two ways. Politics like the president of the government, president of the nation, electoral programs, language policy, rules, laws. But politics also refers to every instance in which there is an unequal distribution of power, in which some groups are benefited at the expense of others. So language ideologies always will benefit some groups over the others. And language ideologies normally are not imposed, they are accepted. So when you hear someone saying, my English or my Spanish is not good, it's just my variety, we speak really badly. You see, this ideology is not imposed on these people. They are totally convinced about certain criteria that they are believing and which is naturalized. So that's an example of language ideology. I'm going to use three examples of language ideologies: cultural nationalism, continuity of the language as sociolinguistic naturalism, and I'm going to apply it to two contexts: the regional elections held in the Valencian region mainly, and in a shorter way, in a shorter space, Spanish in the US. Now, what is cultural nationalism? Cultural nationalism is a language ideology that says that there is an organic, natural connection between language and the community it represents, between language and identity, language and nation. It appeared in the context of colonialism, mainly in the 19th century, and with the support of the philosophical thought of German Romanticism, with Herder, Fichte, Humboldt. Now, because it's a language ideology, it can be contested. And the contestation of this, the opposition, is called civic nationalism. And one example, you find it in Ernest Renan, in a discourse in 1882, called Qu'est-ce que c'est une nation? What is a nation? In which he says, look, language doesn't force me to belong to a political nation. It is the will of the members of that nation that will tell me if I belong to a nation or not. Second language ideology that I'm going to use, continuity of the language. Just think when you study the history of English literature or history of the English language, you start with the Anglo-Saxon period normally. You have the origin, and then there's a sort of continuous history in which English is always associated with a constant identity. Now, political identity, and always in a sort of balanced, continuous way. What happens? That normally there's a sort of improvement, a teleological history. So language is born, but then it improves. Now, there's a way to contradict or oppose this ideology. It's called post-philology, a term that was invented by one of my professors, who is now at the University of Dartmouth, Michelle Warren, who said, look, it's better to study the history of language looking at discontinuities, episodes of rupture. So, for example, in the case of Catalan, there was a big debate at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, about if Catalan was an independent language vis-a-vis Occitan. Also, an important element to remember for this talk is Valencian linguistic secessionism. Some people from the Valencian region argue that Valencian is not a variety of the overall Catalan language, but a different language altogether. that is an episode of discontinuity of the language. Now, I talk about all of this in my second monograph, The Making of Catalan Linguistic Identity, published in English, and then in my third monograph as well, that appeared in 2019. Now, sociolinguistic naturalism. Sociolinguistic naturalism, it's language ideology that says that there's a natural relationship between language and society. The consequence of this is that languages are divided in two groups: authentic languages and anonymous languages. Unauthentic language is important because it represents the identity of a community, whereas an anonymous language is important because by nature is able to embrace different identities and at the same time is naturally more prone to become a global language. So the important thing is the message that you give with that language, not the identity that it represents. Now, what happens? So some languages are anonymous by nature, for example, Spanish, according to some, and some others are authentic, for example, Catalan, because it's not the common language of Spain. Now, so it's a sort of linguistic Darwinism. So Spanish has become dominant because it's by nature superior. What happens? Pierre Bourdieu, in Language and Symbolic Power, that you can find in 1991, uses the term méconnaissance, which means ignorance in French. He says, look, French, English, and Spanish, is the way I apply it as well, says French, for example, is a global language because some historical elements that happened, that had they not happened, probably that language would not be as global as we think. But we tend to erase those elements. So language are not global or anonymous or authentic by nature. No, it depends on the context. For example, Catalan, as I said before, between the 13th and the 15th century was quite anonymous, quite international. But then, due to the historical reasons, it became more anonymous. So, more authentic. So, the best way is to put it in a sort of line in which languages may move from extreme authenticity to extreme anonymity, or be in the middle, depending on the context. Okay, after this accidental introduction, I'm going to apply now the three ideological elements to context: the Valencian regional municipal elections and the situation of Spanish in the US. What happens in May 28th, 2023? And I voted. From here, but I did vote. So the result was that we have the formation of a new government in the Valencian region, one of the 17 regions in which Spain is divided, one of the regions in which Catalan is co-official with Spanish, and the only region in the Catalan-speaking lands where in the statute Catalan appears with a different name, Valencian. Well, in this region, in the elections, well, you see that the winner was the Popular Party, and please remember this name, Popular Party, or PP, Popular Party, conservative. And they won the largest amount of votes, but not enough to form a government. So they decided to join with the far-right group called Vox. Now, this government had some linguistic consequences, but this government was very much in contrast with the previous government between 2015 and 2023, in which there was a left-wing government, with government mainly composed of the Socialists, Compromís, and Podem, some members that belong to the left side of the political spectrum. Now, the Popular Party and Vox have in common that they refuse the language identity between all the Catalan-speaking lands that I have been describing. They think that the Valencian region is linguistically independent, and that's why they refuse this linguistic community called Països Catalans, Catalan countries. That means the areas where Catalan is the native tongue. Now, in my analysis, I'm going to demonstrate that both the Popular Party and Vox have the ideology of transforming the Valencian region in a monolingual region, meaning only one language, Spanish. And they describe the Valencian region as a colonial other, meaning that we Valencians, and I am Valencian, so we have an unstable UNS, unstable identity, and we need to pay attention to other more stable identities to form our identity. And we have two options. the Spanish-speaking part of Spain and the Catalan-speaking with stable identity part of Spain, mainly the region of Catalonia. So according to the Popular Party and Vox, the only way to keep the Valencian identity would be identifying with the Spanish-speaking community, the Spanish-speaking stable identity. So this would be the so-called Catalan countries, a term that the Popular Party and Vox despise, because that is a sort of the Catalan-speaking community, and that goes against their ideology. So you have there the description of what I described before. Catalonia, 6 million, the Valencian region, 3 million, Balearic Islands, and then all those areas in which, despite not being co-official, Catalan is the native-speaking land. Now, let's go to the agreement between a Popular Party and Vox. This is the original in Spanish, and then translation, my translation in English. I'm going to read it. We will pass a law of signs of identity to protect the values, customs, and traditions of the Valencian region as an essential part of the rich plurality of Spain. As a result, we will eliminate all the subsidies granted to any entity or association supporting the Catalan countries. Okay. Pay attention to the use of capitals and low-case letters. You see that is, forget about we, because that's the beginning of the discourse, but look, signs of identity, Valencian region, and Spain. And then Catalan countries in small letters against the spelling rules of English, Spanish, and Catalan. This is the connotation of this is that the identity of the Valencian region will be defined mainly by Spain. It says plurality, but in low case letters, Spain connotes Spanish, not the Catalan countries, which means not the Catalan language. Now, what is the origin of the term Catalan countries? Well, it appeared in Valencia, believe it or not, in 1876 in Spanish, Países Catalanes, not Països Catalans. But it was in a sort of legal context, saying in the past, the community of language also was a community of common laws. It was a little bit forgotten to a certain extent until 1962, when Joan Fuster, another Valencian from the region of Valencia, published in 1962, Nosaltres els Valencians, we the Valencians. And he says, look, the Valencian region, we want to keep our identity, and we have two options. We may want to be independent linguistically as well, but that's a utopia. The only way to maintain our real identity is to join with the rest of the Catalan countries and to keep our language, because the fact that we have a common language means that historically we had other points in common, and means that potentially we have a future. So a Valencian region that is independent will be eaten up by the Spanish-speaking lands, and the Valencian region, as such, will disappear. Now, this was a bomb, and at this point, because it was during the Franco dictatorship, and this led during the rest of the dictatorship and also during the democratic transition between 1975, 1980, more or less 1982, to the fact that in the Valencian region, among the Catalan-speaking areas, the center-right parties focused on Valencian linguistic secessionism to gain votes. To say that Valencian was an independent language from Catalan, you would get votes from certain sectors. And that appears very, very highlighted in the Valencian region during this period, paradoxically not in the Balearic Islands, the other Catalan-speaking land that is not Catalonia. Now, 1982, 1995, we have a sort of socialist government. 1995, 2015, these two parties fight, and they use the linguistic secessionism, Valencian linguistic secessionism all the time, especially the Popular Party, the conservative one, saying Valencian is an independent language. However, once the Popular Party was in power for 20 years, it seems they relaxed, they calmed down, and they even created the Valencian Academy of the Language. And you would think, well, they created that to stress the difference between Valencian and Catalan. Well, no. In 2005, the AVL, the Valencian Academy of the Language, supported the that Valencian was part of the Catalan-speaking lands. However, after the elections, or during the elections of last spring, we see that the Popular Party has changed its mind a little bit. So let's go to electoral program of Popular Party last spring, and before May 28th. It says, the Valencian language is one of the most relevant symbols of our identity. We will not allow any interference of other co-official languages. And we may think, well, this is cultural nationalism because Valencian represents an identity. But let's look at it the other way. You put territory before language to determine your identity, okay? Because you put the Valencian region before language, so the Valencian region will determine the language that you speak and will determine your identity. That is why you don't want other co-official languages to interfere. This is an indirect reference to Catalan, and a rejection of the idea of Catalan countries. In the electoral program of the same Popular Party, conservatives again, there's a rejection of Catalan countries, the areas where Catalan is the native tongue, and also they stress the fact that in the Valencian statute, the name given to the language is Valencian. So you can see that the fact that instead of calling it Catalan, you call it Valencia, has many ramifications, ideological ramifications possible. Now, again, we see that even though the Popular Party founded the Valencian Academy of the Language, in this last electoral program, they say, we will acknowledge, it's in green, we will acknowledge the validity of the qualifications in the Valencian language granted by L'Horat Penat. L'Horat Penat means bat in English, okay? It's an organization that was founded in the 19th century, but in 1977, they became secessionists. They started saying that Valencian is an independent language vis-a-vis Catalan. Now, supporting L'Horat Penat means opposing the AVL in blue, which is the organization together with the philological section of the Institute of Catalan Studies that creates the standard of Catalan. So in a way, it goes against the Popular Party policy before, and also goes against the Article 41st of the Valencian Statute that says that the AVL, the Valencian Academy of the Language, is the only body that can regulate the language. Now, the agreement between Popular Party and Vox that we commented about capital letters, you can see that it says, to protect the values, customs, and traditions of the Valencian region. There's no direct mention of the language, which it connotes that the identity can be represented by other things such as values, customs, and traditions, not necessarily language. And although the Catalan countries implies not Catalan definitely. So Vox, the far-right group, is very explicit regarding language, much more than the Popular Party. And they say something like that in the electoral program. They say, education will be completely in Spanish. So if you want to become, or should be, if you want to become a teacher or a civil servant, you will not be required, as it is today, to learn Catalan or Valencian. You should be fine with Spanish. No reference whatsoever to the co-officiality of Valencian. Now, and I'm finishing with this part. So if you go back to the electoral program of Popular Party, you will see that the Popular Party says the same thing in a more implicit way. It says, the Valencian identity, this is in green, will be represented with symbols such as the name, the flag, the anthem, and the day of the Valencian region, as well as two official languages, Castilian or Spanish and Valencian, music, bands, orchestras, choruses, la, 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 la. So you see that the Valencian identity is represented by a long line of elements. One of them is the two co-official languages. There are two. And Valencian, and then Castilian or Spanish. Look at how Spanish appears with two names. This connotes that Spanish is Castilian because it was authentic, it was born in the crown of Castile, but then it was strong enough by nature to become anonymous. That's why it's called Spanish. So the Valencian region can be represented by Spanish perfectly well because it's part of the Spanish nature and part of the Valencian nature as well. Now, let's go to the US in the last minutes that I have. If you're interested in Spanish in the US, I invite you to consider taking the class that I'm going to teach next semester, Spanish language in the United States. It's in Spanish, though, but I'm open to teach it in English whenever, if the demand is high, and I think it is, so I'll consider that. Now, okay, so let's go to a book published in 2004 by a Harvard professor, Samuel Huntington. Who are we? Yeah? And he says Mexican American, above all Mexican American or Mexican immigration as a danger for the US, because that will mean that the US will not be a unity anymore. It will be two peoples. Says there's only one America created by Anglo-Protestant society. And I quote, "Would America be the America it is today in the 17th and 80th centuries if it had been settled not by British Protestants, but by French, Spanish, or Portuguese Catholics? The answer is no. It will not be America. It would be Quebec, Mexico, or Brazil." Right? So, and he says, but Mexican Americans can share this American dream if they dream in English. That means if they use English. Okay, so here you have the three language ideologies that I have described. So cultural nationalism, the US, the American dream, the US, the Anglo-Protestant society that is the basis of the US, supposedly, is in English. Linguistic continuity. For the American dream to continue, it has to be, the language must be conserved, kept. And sociolinguistic naturalism. If you want the American dream, you need to use English. So it's quite clear, but this is based on some myths that you find in the American society, and not all of them, but many Americans. And by the way, my analysis of Huntington and the myths that I'm going to mention now are based. Huntington's book, I'm based on José del Valle analysis and Ofelia Garcia, 2013, and then these myths, and I'm almost done. This is based on Kim Potosky, one of the authors of Spanish in the U.S., Cambridge University Press. Now, the first myth that we find there is that many people think that English is the official language of the US. The answer is no. Okay, so English doesn't have an official language. Many people think that. This is cultural nationalism. However, English, in practical terms, de facto in Latin, is the official language of the US. Why? If you want to find a good job or be successful in the US, you need English. But if you have Spanish, you will be even more successful. Okay, so take this into account. The other thing is that legally, de jure in Latin, English is not the official language of the United States. It's not, okay? They've been trying, but it's not. However, is the official language in 32, and I promise that I'm almost done. So, is the official language of 32 states in the US. The last one, West Virginia, 2016. Now, second myth that we find, linguistic diversity of the US is recent due to immigration. Not really. There were like 300 indigenous languages before the Europeans settled. Plus, guess what? Let's go to before America, when the US was part of the British Empire, 1753. Benjamin Franklin writes a letter to the British member of Parliament, Peter Collinson, and says, "There are too many Germans. They are having too many children. Our language is in danger. Our government will become precarious." So look at that. Our language is in danger. Our government is in danger. So cultural nationalism there. And guess what? There were many German speakers in Pennsylvania, Missouri, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. And the language was kept until the 5th generation. And I will explain later, very shortly, how this is very significant. Because normally languages other than English only survive up to the 3rd generation. Okay? So what happens? Well, between 1846 and 1848, there's the Mexican-American War, plus the Gadsden Purchase, 1953, plus several negotiations, to such an extent that in 1912, the southwest of the United States is not part of Mexico anymore, it's part of the US. 2/5 of Mexico go to the United States. What happens is that many Spanish speakers are now in American territory. And we have an interesting comment by the Senator of South Carolina, Calhoun. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. He says, I quote, "We have never dreamt of incorporating into our union any but the Caucasian race, the free white race. To incorporate Mexicans would be the very first instance of the kind of incorporating an Indian race. For more than half of the Mexicans are Indians, and the other is composed chiefly of mixed tribes." So let's see. José del Valle, Ofelia Garcia have demonstrated how this has sort of the rational impurity is also projected onto language, as we can see in Huntington's book that I have mentioned before. Now, this is just again an example of cultural nationalism to a certain extent, and definitely linguistic continuity. Now, third myth, immigrants do not learn English, and I have 2 more minutes and I'm done. So immigrants do not learn English as fast as in the past. I mean, I have no comments about this, because now that's when migrants learn English faster for many reasons. I mean, it's easier to start with, and you need it. Now, you need to take into account that whenever you hear, no, Spanish is going to be the dominant language in the US in 2050. No. No, because languages other than English disappear definitely after the 3rd generation. So, for example, I'm a 1st-generation Spanish speaker. Okay, so I was born in Spain and I came to the US. Now, if I ever have children, they will be 2nd generation, and my grandchildren will be 3rd generation. I can guarantee you that if that ever happens, and sociolinguists have been studying this for a while, that in the 4th generation, Spanish will be gone. And the same thing happens, even if you are living in Little Havana in Miami or in Jackson Heights in New York. It doesn't matter. If you're 2nd generation, if you're born in the US, it doesn't matter what you hear. You're going to be native speaker of English. And you can test me on that. Okay, so no, English is not threatened. Now, 4th myth, linguistic diversity threatens national unity. This is something that Joshua Fishman studied in 170 multilingual countries, and that doesn't work like that. So there are movements who believe this, and they want to make English official language. They want that to appear in the US Constitution. Is this necessary? No, because English is de facto the official language of the US. You need English to sort of go ahead. And again, I repeat, and if you add Spanish, you will be even more successful. Now, there are 2 movements to try to make English the official language of the US, English only and US English. They try almost every year. I don't have the time to explain it, but if you have questions later, we can deal with that. But US English is interesting because it was founded in 1983 by Senator S.I. Ayakawa, a Japanese descent, born in Vancouver, but he supports this idea, and there are 2 million people members in his organization. And he says, we should make English official federally because migrants will learn English and they will be more successful. My answer for that would be, maybe because I don't share that ideology, is that migrants, you don't need to make English official federally for migrants to learn English. That's to start with. But here is the perfect example of sociolinguistic naturalism. The idea that English by nature is a language more adapted to the global world is the key to be successful. Well, I hope that I have sparked your interest. Apologies for the confusion at the beginning. I just hope that you got more or less the meaning that I was trying to conceive or transmit, sorry. And I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Hello, Vicente.
Hello.
That was a wonderful talk, and thank you. As a political scientist, I think, when I look at these questions about the autonomous communities in Spain and how language and culture plays into, and I always see language as a political tool, more so just the lens that I use. If you could maybe elaborate a little bit more, what's interesting about Vox as a far right party and what makes it so different than any other far right party in Europe is that it started with actually the anti-Catalan secessionist movement was really their main issue. And then anti-immigration is really, it's an issue for them, but it's like a secondary issue for them. In what way has Vox used the linguistic question and maybe the anti-immigration question as part of that to gain, the foothold that they have in Valencia? And you expressed this, but the 2023 election was shocking, the outcome for Valencia. And having written on Valencian politics, it was surprising. And the foothold that Vox has gotten in many autonomous communities, and not just in Valencia, but in other local regional. That's why that election was so surprising. If you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on the role of Vox and how they use language, culture, identity issues as a political tool, not just in Valencia, but even in other parts, and focusing on sort of the anti-Catalan, if you will.
Okay, so let's see. We should remember that Vox didn't come out of the blue. It descends from the Popular Party. So it evolved a little bit from the Popular Party. I'm not saying that they are exactly the same, but at least in language ideology, they are very similar, at least in the Valencian region. So let's see. The monolingualism that you find in Vox is very similar to the monolingualism that you found during the dictatorship between 1939 and 1975. I would say that. It's very close to that, just to give you a sort of reference. There may be some differences. Maybe they cannot be as upfront, but the ideology is more or less the same. But something that is key with Vox, I think, and with Catalan independentism and nationalism is 2006, when the Statute of Catalonia is approved by the Catalan government and the central government in Madrid. They accepted some revisions of the Catalan statute. As you know, the mini constitutions that regions in Spain have. Catalonia is one of the 17 regions, and they decided to make some amendments to the Statute of Autonomy of Catalonia. 2006, it was approved by the central government, the House of Representatives, the equivalent, Congreso de los Diputados in Madrid, which at that point, the majority party was the Socialist Party. Okay. Immediately after, the Popular Party goes to the Constitutional Tribunal or the Constitutional Court because alleging or saying that the amendments were completely unconstitutional. The result is that in 2010, in the middle of a very strong economic crisis that had started in 2008, remember this, and I think Professor Doubleday wrote a wonderful article in The Guardian, much deeper than what I'm going to say, but if you can read it, go ahead and read it. So there was, in 2010, there was like, in the middle of an economic crisis, the Constitutional Tribunal Court indicated that they didn't allow certain changes in the Catalan statute, and that created a lot of tension. The Catalan government started asking for economic benefits regarding taxes, which is an issue right now as well. They want the Basque and Navarrese model as well to use their own taxes, and also there were some problems about saying that Catalonia was a nation, but the main problem there, Caroline, was that Rajoy, President Rajoy, who was the general secretary of the boss of the Popular Party, just did his best to get signature all over Spain to oppose Catalanism, or whatever how they describe it. This gave rise to an anti-Catalanist feeling. It increased, it highlighted the anti-Catalanist feelings, and a lot of it in the Valencian region, believe it or not. So there was an anti-Catalanist feeling, and I remember one colleague of mine who told me, I didn't used to be independentist. I didn't want the independence of Catalonia, but to see that so many Spaniards are against me, I might as well leave the Spanish state. Many of them, and that increased. Now, and I have to say it, in the last years that the Popular Party is not in power, it seems that the level of independentism has gone down, okay? So, Vox, this far-right party, used the anti-Catalanese element the same way that the Popular Party used it since 1975 at least, until nowadays. But it applied it to other regions. They just find they use the sort of ignorance of people that they don't understand that I may speak Spanish. They don't understand why I have to speak Catalan with my family and with other people who speak my language. They are used to monolingualism. So, and this is more or less similar to what I said about the dictatorship period. But as far as migration is concerned, this was successful in areas with a great amount of immigration that go to do some periodical jobs. We're talking about Murcia. Murcia is a very stronghold for Vox as well, or at least it used to be. And the Valencian region also happened, but you say that you found striking that Vox was so powerful in Valencia. I didn't, unfortunately. And there's some areas in particular, I mean, I wasn't surprised at all. So, although I believe, even though, I mean, it's not, and I love my region and everything, but I mean, I was surprised, I'm not going to deny it, but I could see the possibility of many people voting Popular Party to vote for Vox. And one of the things that fed this ideology, moving towards Vox, was anti-Catalanism. I remember talking to my high school mates from the northern part of the region of Valencia. I'm from the southern part, but I did my high school in the northern part. And they were talking about that, and I used an expression. I was writing in Catalan, my academic Catalan, and I used an expression. Instead of saying abraçada, instead of saying abraçar, I said abraçada. They just fell on me. What is this? Why are you using Catalan? And that shows you how sensitive these issues can be. And it's not only language, it's how you interpret linguistic difference. That is key. So that's all I can say. I don't know if I have answered your question, but we can talk a little bit more because I'm sure that you know more about Vox that I may know. So it's something that, and sorry for talking too much, but this question was amazing. So thank you for the question.
Hello, Vicente. Thank you very much for your speech and for the unnecessary shout-out a moment ago. That's very kind.
I had to.
Yeah. Both you and I are medieval Hispanists, and from one Hispanist to another, from one medievalist to another, I want to ask you about the use of the term taifas, referring to the 11th century petty kingdoms which existed under Muslim control in the Iberian Peninsula. Now, my understanding is that the Partido Popular, the Popular Party, has used the kind of rhetoric of taifas to refer to all these little, I shouldn't say little, to refer to the regions which you showed on the map. So they've invoked the memory of Muslim Spain in this kind of very aggressive way, with this kind of prospect of a unified monolingual Spain in mind. Now, in that kind of context, I wonder, I mean, the sort of implicitly anti-Muslim, anti-Arabic context, I wondered whether you could talk about how many Arabic speakers there are in Spain today. I'm thinking about all the migrants coming over from Morocco, from Algeria, and whether anyone in Valencia or Catalonia, where there are large numbers of migrant workers, whether anyone has ever floated the idea of making Arabic a recognized language, a co-official language. Mm-hmm. And if not, and my guess is not, whether you could speak to what that might reveal about power and the sort of powerlessness of those Arabic speakers. Thank you.
No, thank you. This is a very good question. Okay, I don't know if I have all the answers, but I'm gonna try. So what Simon, Professor Doubleday, is referring. So until 1031, between, I think it was between 921 and 1031, you have a sort of Caliphate of Cordoba. So the sort of Hispanic Muslim empire with the capital in Cordoba. So it was a vibrant part of European history and part of Spanish history. So in 1031, for political reasons, that Muslim empire was divided into different kingdoms called taifas. Now, and again, there's a sort of fractal recursivity, I mean, application of that division to nowadays, especially I guess, mainly from Vox, but I wouldn't be surprised if that comes from the Popular Party as well, to just show a sort of comparison. I mean, one thing has nothing to do with the other, but the taifas is considered to be a moment in which the splendor of the Caliphate of Cordoba goes down. So the idea is that if you start accepting too much autonomy based on language or whatever the criterion, so that means that Spain as a whole body, as a whole nation, will become weaker and will end up like the taifas, conquered by whatever, I don't know what political power would be, but the essence of the Spanish identity would die out due to this division. Divide and conquer. That's the idea. Now, the fact, and I agree with you, the fact that you are using a comparison with the Muslim world, that according to the Francoist area, the Muslim era is supposed to be a dark period, which is absurd, but something that needed to be corrected, means that you are adding inside the psyche a sort of fear towards, the term taifa is not, I don't think is innocent. It's just a way of making you more convincing, that installing or convincing you in an easier way. That's what I would say. So it's not an innocent comparison, and that's why the same people that use that metaphor celebrate the January the 2nd. That's when the Ciro Granada was entered by the two kings, the king and queen that you saw there. Now, as far as the Arabic language is concerned, well, what you are telling me could be applied to, although it's a different context, but just to let you know that Arabic migration, as you know, is also very present in France, for example, but the conditions that Spain offers, the possibility that the autonomous regions may consider other languages spoken as co-official with Spanish, the possibilities, potentially Spain is much more prone to do something like what you are describing, which would be something, I don't want to say impossible, but very improbable. But what you are bringing up, it's amazing. I mean, something to think about, that maybe is so difficult that we don't even think about that. Number of Arabic speakers, I would say quite a high number. But is there a census to check that? Yeah, it could be. I mean, scholars could do that, but it would be something to be supported. The problem is that the difference between Arabic and the other regional languages is that Arabic would follow the 3-generation rule. That's the feeling that I have. It would not be considered like a native language, although languages such as Valencian, for example, I mean. And I have to tell you this, okay? So my mom and my father and my mother, they got married, obviously, and then when my siblings and I were born, my father said, "You need to speak to our children in Spanish." And my mom told me, I used to say yes because I didn't want to have an argument, but when your dad left, I would speak to you in Valencian, in Catalan, because I couldn't speak to you in anything else. It would be completely artificial. So thanks to my mom, I learned the language. So some of my friends followed my mom's trend, or some of my other friends didn't, and you could see. So what I'm trying to tell you is that even though a language may be native in an area, if you ideologically start thinking that Spanish is superior and it's gonna give you more possibilities, so you may not transmit that language to your children, and the language will end up disappearing, especially in a country like Spain, that again happens like English here. Spanish is everywhere. Spanish is everywhere, so you're gonna learn it. So that's, I hope that I have clarified a little bit, but the question is both questions amazing. Thank you.
Professor, thank you for your talk. It's very weird to hear you speak in English, and actually very weird to be speaking to you in English. But one of my questions is, in the beginning of your talk, you defined a language as having its own orthography, its own dictionary, and with the Popular Party, it seems like Valencian is a different language than Catalan. So my question is if Valencian has its own orthography and dictionary that establishes itself as its own language.
Excellent question. Excellent question. And let's see. So as I said, I mean, the authorities that establish that codification, you know, the existence of spelling rules, orthography, dictionary, and grammar is there are some academies. English doesn't have one because it had too much French flavor to take root both in the U.S. and in the British Empire at that point. So that was, but you had other means like the Webster and stuff like that. But despite of that, so you have what is called the academies of the language. The first one was in Italy, 1582. The second one, Kruška. The second one was in France, l'Académie Française, 1635, in the time of the Musketeers. And then in 1713, you have the Spanish Academy of the Language. And then you have many others. So these bodies are the authority to create the rules. With the Catalan-speaking lands, you have this authority in 1911, the philological section of the Institute of Catalan Studies. And then in 1998, the Popular Party created a new body exclusively for the Valencian region, and it appears in the statute. This one is the Valencian Academy of Language. And people thought, and they still think it, wrongly. They say, no, but this is going to be an independentist codification, and it's going to stress the difference between Valencian and Catalan. Well, that ended up not happening. So in 2005, there's an explicit manifest in which the Valencian Academy says, we belong to the Catalan-speaking community. They don't use Catalan countries. They don't use because they are very careful. It's difficult to use it in the Valencian region. Anyway, so there have been many, the example is lo rat penat, the bat, this alternative. So there have been many attempts, but I can tell you that even if you try very hard to write in a sort of Valencian, following the vocabulary above all, because remember, the differences between varieties of language are mainly vocab, the strongest. Then you have phonetics and then morphosyntaxes. And the super linguists that are here may agree, or I think they agree. So the thing is that even if you try very hard, you see the commonalities. However, and this is being quite, saying that Catalan and Valencian are the same language is as much ideological as saying that Valencian and Catalan are not. But I can tell you that if the Valencians want to create an independent language and you cultivate it and you use it and you normalize it, meaning that you use it in different contexts, that would be okay, that would be acceptable, I think. But the problem is that those who support Valencian secessionism, normally they put that as a first step towards Spanish monolingualism. You know, like the first step to eliminate Valencian. An example, and then I'll shut up. And let's see. So Valencia, the city of Valencia, is written in Spanish without an accent. In 1996, there were movements to write it in the Catalan way, which was with an accent like this, looking towards up left. Yes. So what happens? That is the accent that, according to the Institute of Catalan Studies, founded in 1911, the philological section. What happens? In 1996, it wasn't successful because the Popular Party was in power, among other reasons, so it has a process. And then in 2017, there was a new movement in which that was successful. So between 2017 and 2023, Valencia, it does not appear anymore with the Spanish way, without accent. It appears with this accent like this over the E, over the E. Now, May 28th, 2023, electoral program of Popular Party says, from now on, the word Valencia will appear the Catalan way and the Spanish way. So we are going to use both ways. And Vox said, well, we will support this if instead of putting the accent like this, you put it like this. Okay? What happens? Because and this is true, because it reflects the Valencian pronunciation. This is true. I don't say Valencia, I say Valencia. But that's the allegation and the sort of scientific or linguistic, but the juridical body of the municipal government of Valencia said you cannot ask that because according to the Valencian Academy of the Language, the accent is like this. So what happens? That then 2 days later, the representative of Vox, 2 days later, several days later, appears giving a talk in the city of Valencia City Hall. And the word Valencia, that used to be written with the accent like this, appears without an accent, but on the accent you have the Spanish flag. So that shows you the ideology. They may pretend that they want to, defend the Valencian identity. And as I said, I mean, if it were like that, okay, at least it's very personal. I mean, as long as you cultivate the language. I agree with Joan Fuster that it's better to form a community, the Catalan-speaking community. That's what attracts me the most. But it is possible. But you can see that all these people who support the Valencian linguistic secessionism, at the end of the day, the main goal is Spanish monolingualism. But the question, you gave me the opportunity, 3 wonderful questions, and I'm not saying this to be nice. You have inspired me, but this last question gave me the opportunity to say things that I didn't have the time to say. So thank you so much, Antonio.